When my family told me I wasn't welcome at Grandma's will reading, I laughed at first. Not because it was funny, but because it sounded so ridiculous that I thought they must be joking. I was 34 years old, and if I've learned anything, it's that people will twist reality to suit their own version of the truth. But the words stung. They called me ungrateful, as if all the years I spent helping Grandma, driving her to doctor appointments, sitting up with her on nights when her arthritis was too bad to sleep, reading her favorite novels aloud, when her eyesight faded, hadn't counted for anything. My Aunt Marjorie was the one who spat the word at me over the phone, her voice sharp like broken glass. "Grandma was disappointed in you," she said. "You don't deserve to be there." I hung up and stared at my reflection in the kitchen window, the steam from my untouched tea fogging the glass. I could see my own eyes wide and searching, as if I could read some deeper answer behind them. Was I really ungrateful? The truth was complicated. I loved my grandmother more than anyone else in that family, but I hadn't played the game. I hadn't fawned over Marjorie the way my cousins did, hadn't competed in the silent contest for approval that always seemed to orbit her. I had been too busy living my own life, and maybe that made me a threat. Still, the wound cut deeper than I wanted to admit. For as long as I can remember, my family has made me feel like the outsider. I was the child of their black sheep, my mother who ran off with a man they said was beneath her, only to return years later with me in tow. My mother died young, and Grandma was the one who raised me, even when Marjorie sneered that she was wasting her golden years on someone else's mistake. I grew up in Grandma's house, tucked into the bedroom that smelled of cedar and lavender. I remember her brushing my hair at night, her hands gentle, her voice telling me stories of her own girlhood during the war, stories she never shared with anyone else. So when I was told I wasn't welcome at the will reading, it wasn't just about the money, it was about belonging. It was about being erased from the narrative of the only woman who ever made me feel like I was worth something. The morning of the reading, I almost stayed home. I almost let them win. But something inside me, maybe Grandma's voice, the way she used to tell me to stand tall even when they want you small, pushed me out the door. When I arrived at the lawyer's office, I could feel their stares. My cousins exchanged smirks, whispering like children at the back of a classroom. Marjorie's lips tightened in disapproval, as though she'd been robbed of a private victory by my mere presence. I took a seat at the far end of the long oak table, my hands clasped together in my lap so tightly my knuckles turned white. I didn't say a word. The lawyer, Mr. Davis, was a gray-haired man with a calm, unreadable face. He cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and began reading. At first, everything was ordinary. Grandma had left small bequests, her jewelry to one cousin, her collection of antique teacups to another. Marjorie leaned forward expectantly, practically salivating as he went down the list. And then he paused. My breath caught because I could sense the shift in the room before he even spoke. And finally, he said, his voice measured, "The remainder of the estate, including the house, and the farmland shall be left in its entirety to my granddaughter Claire." It took me a second to register that he had said my name. Claire. Me. My ears rang, and for a moment I thought I might faint. The room erupted into chaos. My cousins gasped. Marjorie shot up from her chair, her face blotchy and red, sputtering. "This is impossible. She's lying. She doesn't deserve a dime." I sat frozen, every muscle in my body locked. I wanted to cry, to scream, to laugh, but all I could do was sit there and absorb the weight of it. After years of being dismissed, after being called ungrateful and unwanted, Grandma had left me everything. But it wasn't just the inheritance. It was the letter Mr. Davis pulled out of a sealed envelope, written in Grandma's careful, looping handwriting. As he read it aloud, my eyes blurred with tears. She spoke of me as her greatest joy, the child who had reminded her of love after loss. She wrote about the nights we spent talking, the way I had held her hand when she was afraid, the quiet loyalty I had shown when others were too busy or too self-serving. "You were never ungrateful, Claire," the letter said. "You were the only one who truly gave without asking for anything in return." In that moment, everything shifted. The betrayal of my family still burned, but Grandma's words poured over it like balm. It was as if she had reached across the divide of death itself to tell me the truth, to anchor me in her love one last time. The weeks after the will reading felt like living inside a storm. I had thought the revelation would silence my family, maybe even humble them. Instead, it set them on fire. The phone calls began almost immediately, angry voicemails from my cousins accusing me of manipulating Grandma in her final years. Marjorie's voice, shrill and venomous, left message after message. "You think you've won, don't you? You'll regret this, Claire. You'll see what happens when you take what isn't yours." I wanted to ignore them. I wanted to stay strong. But in the quiet hours of the night, I lay awake with my chest tight, wondering if I had done something wrong without realizing it. Doubt is a parasite. It creeps in slowly, feeding on your darkest insecurities, until you can't tell what's real anymore. I kept replaying old moments in my mind. Times when Grandma had scolded me for being stubborn, times when I had pulled away during arguments. Had she thought less of me? Was my family right? One evening, unable to bear the silence of my empty house, I dug out the letter again. Grandma's words steadied me like they always did. "You gave without asking," she had written. That line became my anchor, something I whispered to myself whenever the guilt crept in. But the storm outside me wasn't letting up. Within a month, Marjorie filed a formal challenge to the will, claiming I had coerced Grandma. My stomach dropped when I got the letter from Mr. Davis. I'd seen enough family dramas in real life to know how messy, how cruel these battles could become. I didn't have their money or their influence. All I had was the truth and the quiet, stubborn faith that Grandma hadn't made a mistake. Preparing for the court hearing was like peeling open wounds I thought had scarred over. Mr. Davis sat across from me, his face calm, but his eyes sympathetic as he went through the paperwork. "Your grandmother was of sound mind when she signed this," he reassured me. "We have medical testimony witnesses. They won't be able to disprove it." But logic didn't ease the ache. What hurt the most wasn't the legal fight itself. It was the realization that my family would rather see me destroyed than accept Grandma's choice. I couldn't understand it. I never wanted to take anything from them. I just wanted to belong, to be loved. And yet here they were dragging me through court as if I were some thief who had robbed them in the night. The day of the hearing, I walked into the courthouse with my knees shaking. Marjorie was already there, dressed in a sharp navy suit, her expression dripping with false grief. She clasped her rosary in her hands, muttering prayers loud enough for the judge to hear, as if performing holiness might disguise her greed. My cousin sat behind her, whispering and glaring at me. When the judge asked if I had anything to say, my voice cracked at first. But then I remembered Grandma's letter. I remembered sitting by her bed holding her frail hand, and I spoke. I told them about the nights I read her favorite poems. I told them about her laughter, the way it filled the room even when her body was failing. I told them how she had looked at me, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "You're my legacy." By the time I finished, the courtroom was silent. Even the judge seemed moved. Marjorie tried to interrupt, hissing that I was lying, but her voice wavered and the facade slipped. The evidence was overwhelming. The challenge was dismissed. Walking out of that courthouse, I should have felt triumphant, but instead I felt hollow. Winning didn't erase the pain of what they had tried to do. It didn't erase the memories of being called ungrateful, of being excluded, like I was nothing. Victory can feel like ashes when it comes at the cost of family. That night, I sat in Grandma's old rocking chair, the one that had been placed by her window overlooking the fields. The house smelled like her still lavender old wood and a faint trace of cinnamon from her favorite cookies. For the first time, I let myself cry. Not just for what had happened, but for everything I had lost long before the will reading. The truth was, my family had never really been mine. Grandma had been my anchor, my home, and now she was gone. All that remained was her gift, her words, and the impossible task of figuring out what to do with them. As I rocked back and forth, I felt something shift. Maybe this wasn't just about inheritance. Maybe it was about choice, what I would build out of the ashes they left behind. In the weeks that followed, I wandered through Grandma's house like a ghost. Every creak of the floorboards, every photograph on the wall carried her presence. But there was something else. Something I hadn't noticed before. An envelope tucked inside one of her journals labeled with my name. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a handwritten note, and beneath that, several old receipts and letters that didn't make sense at first. Her note was short, but powerful. Claire, if you're reading this, then the house is yours. You will know what to do. Look deeper. There are things you've never been told, things I couldn't say when others were listening. The truth isn't always pretty, but it sets us free. I spread the documents across the dining table, the same table where she used to serve Sunday dinners. The letters were decades old, written in faded ink. And as I read them, a new story unfolded, one that explained the simmering hostility I had grown up with. Marjorie, the self-righteous aunt who had spent years calling me ungrateful, had once stolen from Grandma. The letters were bank statements, withdrawal slips, and a signed note from Grandma demanding repayment that never came. Grandma had never told me this, but she had kept every piece of evidence. Alongside the paperwork was another letter addressed directly to me. I forgave her, but she never forgave me for knowing the truth. That's why she resented you, Claire. She feared I would see her greed again, and in you she saw my witness. The words left me breathless. For years I had thought I was the problem, that something about me had made them turn cold. But the truth was, Marjorie's hatred had never really been about me. It had been about herself, her guilt, her shame. And Grandma had carried that secret like a stone in her pocket. Suddenly, I understood why Grandma had left me the estate. It wasn't just because she loved me, it was because she trusted me to protect her legacy from those who had tried to strip it away. The inheritance wasn't a gift. It was a responsibility. I spent the next few days in a haze of reflection. Should I expose Marjorie? Should I tell the rest of the family the truth? Part of me wanted revenge, wanted to see her humiliated the way she had tried to humiliate me. But another part of me whispered that revenge alone wouldn't heal the wounds. Grandma had chosen not to shame her sister publicly, even after the betrayal. Could I do any less? And yet I couldn't let the bitterness rot me from the inside out. So I began to act. Quietly, steadily, I started sorting through Grandma's belongings, uncovering more than just old memories. I found journals where she had documented her dreams, dreams of creating a foundation to support struggling single mothers, dreams of using her land not just for crops, but for a community garden that could feed families who had little. Reading her words lit something inside me. For so long, I had been consumed by survival, by proving myself to people who would never see my worth. But here was a purpose larger than myself, larger than the family drama. Maybe this was the answer to what she had meant when she said I would know what to do. I began meeting with local nonprofits, asking questions, listening to stories. I opened the land for community events, small at first, food drives, children's reading circles, free meals on holidays. The old farmhouse became a hub of life again, not just a monument to loss. Every time I saw a mother carrying groceries out of the pantry we'd set up, or children running through the fields laughing, I felt Grandma with me. It was like I was bringing her dream to life piece by piece. But not everyone celebrated. My cousins drove by the property more than once, slowing their cars, watching from the road. I could feel their resentment like a storm cloud on the horizon. One day, I found a note taped to my mailbox. "You'll lose everything. Just wait." The handwriting was unmistakably Marjorie's. My heart pounded as I held the scrap of paper, but instead of fear, I felt an odd calm. They couldn't touch me anymore. Not really. They had already lost the only thing they truly cared about: control. What they didn't understand was that Grandma's legacy wasn't measured in money or land. It was measured in love, in the way it spread from one life to another. And that was something no court ruling, no threat, no bitter word could ever take away from me. The real breaking point came at Thanksgiving, months after the court hearing. I hadn't planned on seeing my relatives ever again, but life has a cruel way of forcing encounters you'd rather avoid. The church I attended was hosting a community dinner, and I had volunteered to help serve. I was carrying trays of food into the hall when I heard a familiar voice behind me, sharp and unmistakable. Marjorie. She hadn't aged well, her once meticulous hair was streaked with gray, her posture stiff, but her eyes still burned with that same simmering contempt. She froze when she saw me, and for a moment the years peeled away. I was a child again, standing in Grandma's kitchen while Marjorie scolded me for eating too many cookies, her gaze always heavy with disapproval. "What are you doing here?" She snapped, her voice low but venomous. I set the tray down, carefully refusing to meet her hostility with my own, serving dinner, like everyone else. Her lips curled. "Parading around pretending to be generous with something that doesn't belong to you." For a heartbeat, I wanted to scream at her, to shove those old receipts and letters in her face and watch her crumble under the weight of her own lies. But I remembered Grandma's words. Forgiveness isn't weakness, it's freedom. So I looked her in the eye and said quietly, "It's not about me. It never was." She didn't answer. She just stared, her face twitching with emotions she couldn't name, then turned and walked out. Watching her retreat, I felt an ache in my chest. Not triumph, not satisfaction, but something closer to grief. She was still trapped in her bitterness, still shackled to her greed, and there was nothing I could do to set her free. That was her choice to make. The months passed, and the foundation grew. What started as small gatherings became something much larger. We partnered with local farms to expand the community garden, set up scholarships for young women, and held workshops that taught practical skills Grandma would have been proud of. Every time I signed a grant, every time I handed a grocery bag to someone in need, I whispered a thank you to her memory. But one day, another shock arrived, this one hidden in the dusty boxes of the attic. I had been cleaning out old trunks, the kind that smell like mothballs and forgotten summers, when I found a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon. They weren't addressed to me. They were love letters written to Grandma long after my grandfather had died. The man who wrote them was a name I vaguely recognized, a family friend I'd heard mentioned only once or twice. As I read, my hands shook. They spoke of secret meetings, of a love they couldn't fully share because of family disapproval. One letter said, "If your daughters knew, they'd turn on you. But Claire is different. She carries your heart, not their judgment." Tears spilled down my cheeks. All this time, Grandma had carried her own secret burdens, her own silent rebellions against the coldness of the very people who now despised me. She had seen herself in me, not because I was perfect, but because I too had chosen love over approval, truth over appearances. It all made sense now. Her choice to leave everything to me wasn't only about trust, it was about redemption. She had been denied the right to live her truth openly, but through me, she ensured that love and authenticity would outlive the bitterness that had plagued our family. The realization hit me like lightning. I wasn't just inheriting land or money. I was inheriting her courage, her unfinished fight to live honestly, to build something meaningful out of brokenness. And with that came a final decision. I called a family meeting, not to beg for their acceptance, not to justify myself, but to lay everything bare. They came reluctantly, Marjorie included, her eyes wary. I told them about the foundation, about the scholarships, about the ways Grandma's legacy was living on. Then, with steady hands, I placed the old receipts and the love letters on the table. "You wanted the inheritance?" I said, my voice trembling but firm. "But it was never about the money. Grandma left you something too, even if you don't see it yet. She left you the chance to choose love instead of greed. I can't force you to take it, but I won't let you destroy what she built." The room was silent. My cousins shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between me and the evidence. Marjorie's face hardened, but I saw a flicker of something, maybe shame, maybe fear. No one spoke. One by one, they left their footsteps echoing through the hallway. I stood alone in the quiet, my chest heavy but clear. For the first time, I realized I didn't need their approval, their acknowledgement, or even their love. I had grandma's. I had the truth. And I had the strength to carry it forward. Winter arrived like a quiet reckoning. The fields outside the farmhouse lay bare, the garden beds tucked beneath frost, and the old rocking chair by the window creaked under my weight as I sat reflecting on everything that had unraveled. For so long I had chased after belonging in a family that had never truly welcomed me. I had begged for scraps of love, tried to prove myself worthy, endured their scorn, and carried the labels they pressed against my skin. Ungrateful, outsider, mistake. But the truth was, the only person whose love I had ever truly needed had already given it to me fully and without condition. The day the foundation hosted its first winter fundraiser, I walked into the crowded hall and felt something shift deep inside me. The air was filled with laughter music, the clinking of glasses. Families who had once stood in line at our food drives now mingled with local leaders and volunteers, all of them united by one thing: hope. Hope born from the land my grandmother had left me, from the love she had sown into my life, like seeds waiting to bloom. I thought of her then not in sorrow, but in gratitude. I could almost see her standing in the corner with her hands clasped, smiling that quiet smile she reserved for moments when she was proud, but didn't want to make a fuss. She had trusted me with more than property. She had trusted me with her dream. And for the first time, I knew I was living it. Marjorie never apologized. She never came around, never softened. In the end, I realized she probably never would. Her bitterness was her inheritance, the one she had chosen for herself. At first, that broke my heart. But with time, I understood closure doesn't come from someone else's admission of guilt. It comes from choosing to stop carrying what was never yours to hold. On the 1-year anniversary of Grandma's passing, I visited her grave. The wind was sharp, and the sky hung low with winter clouds. I knelt down, brushing snow off the headstone, and whispered the words I had carried in my heart for so long. Thank you. For everything. For loving me when no one else did. For believing in me. I hope I'm making you proud. I left behind a single lavender sprig, her favorite scent, and walked away without looking back. For the first time, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt carried. I felt whole. Life doesn't always give us the family we long for. Sometimes the people who should love us the most become the ones who wound us deepest. But I've learned that betrayal doesn't have to define us. We can choose to take the shards of what's broken and build something stronger, something beautiful. My inheritance wasn't just a house or money or land. It was the freedom to stop chasing approval. It was the courage to stand in my truth no matter how others twisted it. And it was the lesson that real love isn't loud or showy. It's steady. It's present. It's the hand that holds yours in the dark, the voice that tells you you're enough when the world calls you ungrateful. So to anyone watching this who has ever felt excluded, betrayed, or silenced by the people you call family, hear me when I say this: their rejection does not define your worth. Sometimes the family we lose makes room for the family we build, and the legacy we carry forward is more powerful than the pain they leave behind. If my story has touched you, I hope you'll take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe for more stories about standing up to betrayal and finding peace on the other side. And if you've ever faced something similar, I'd love for you to leave a comment below. Your story matters, and maybe sharing it will be the first step toward your own healing.